Do you think Russia's behind the sabotage of the pipelines?
Well, I think all the signs point to some type of sabotage. These pipelines are only in about 200 feet or so of water, and Russia does have an undersea capability that would easily lay explosive devices by those pipelines. And I do think it's a signal to Europe that Russia can reach beyond Ukraine's borders. So who knows what he might be planning next? But I think this is clearly an act of sabotage of some sort, and Russia is certainly the most likely suspect.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
I promise you we will be able to do it. That's the we're going to blow up the pipeline promise. Although John Brennan says otherwise.
Well, John Brennan's a former director of the CIA who's just a known liar. Don't believe a word John Brennan ever says about anything. But in this case, we can take Joe Biden at his word. There's 100% certainty in my mind that the United States is the perpetrator of the attack on Nord Stream 2. There's the significant circumstantial evidence that goes beyond simply the intent that was expressed by President Biden. Large-scale U.S. naval exercises in the exact location of the explosion back in July, and aircraft flying over again the exact place of the location at the time of the explosion and earlier in September. So let me put it this way: if we were to take Biden to trial for this, he'd be convicted on the evidence. We have a clear statement of intent, and we have the means to do it. We have the motive. We have everything. The United States did it 100%. And the fact that Germany and Europe and everybody else won't step up and call a spade just proves that to the extent to which Europe has subordinated itself as a continent, as subordinate the totality of its sovereignty to American hegemony.
Well, almost all our questions are about that incident, and we'll get to that shortly. And there's somewhat breaking news that competes for it as far as the magnitude of importance. So you might want to say a few words about that too. But let me just answer one of the questions that was flashed on the screen by Tori. The way to read this article is the way to keep up on all things Ritter. Just go to scottritterextra.com. That was published a few days ago by RT and wrote about the CIA and his involvement with it. And he goes into even more vivid detail in his book, which is now available wherever books are sold. And buy it on our website, because then we'll get a small commission if you do. So before we get to the questions, Scott, and as the world is, coming to an end, maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but definitely big changes, it's good to see that our spokesmodel from Texas is still maintaining an upbeat attitude. Ryan, look at the Russian hat, and he's got the adult beverage in his hand and the T-shirt. That is putting it all together.
And he's got the biceps going. So
that's it, right? Yeah, if you buy this T-shirt, the biceps don't come with it. You got to take care of that.
Oh, well, then I'm not buying the T-shirt. I thought the biceps came with it.
Right.
Now I have to go to the gym and earn them.
He is hunky. I am a heterosexual, and this has been documented throughout the years. But I don't mind saying that is one hunky dude. All right. So before we get
for more than 20 years, and you've never said that about me. I'm hurt.
You're jealous. You're jealous.
I'm jealous. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you don't have his biceps. So what do you want?
Well, we've established that as a point of fact. So.
All right. So before we get to the questions, you want to say a few words about Putin's speech, and then we We have a lot of questions, so I don't know if we're going to do a Bruce Springsteen marathon session tonight or not, but we'll get to whatever we can.
Born in the USA, baby.
Did you see he's coming out with a surprise album? Did you see that? All soul covers.
I did, and I also see that he's going to have a concert here in Albany in the springtime. I've dropped numerous hints to my children to work overtime to earn enough money to buy Papa a ticket. So we'll see.
Very good.
I don't know if we still have the inside track to backstage passes anymore, but given the political differences, but
right. Well, shh! Don't tell him. Maybe he doesn't.
I still enjoy the music.
That's right. We can separate these things. Absolutely.
We're adults. No, today's a day that will go down in history. Today's the day that Russia broke the back of the West. Literally, the West is a defeated entity today. Not only did Russia fulfill the promise it made to the people of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, the four former Ukrainian territories that today were formally incorporated into the Russian Federation. They've become part of the Russian homeland. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, gave a speech that will go down in history as one of the landmark speeches of all times. This will be up there with any rhetoric put out by anybody. It'll be studied for years because it's a statement of reality. It's a statement of where Russia stands. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I will. You know, if you go back and listen to what I've been saying about Russia, about this conflict, about the nature of relations between Russia and the United States, I'm convinced that Vladimir Putin's speechwriter simply went through and cut and pasted everything I said and put it into his speech, because it literally word for word what I've been saying for some time. And I'm being a little facetious here and trying to be tongue in cheek, but the fact of the matter is, the point I'm trying to make is Putin's speech wasn't political rhetoric. It was fact, hard fact, stone cold fact. The same fact that I've been, speaking of for the past months. It's just the reality that the world finds itself in, and everything he said in there is just dead on accurate about where Russia is. The fact that Russia is fed up with the West. It is a complete divorce with the West. Putin dropped some bombs, rhetorical bombs in this speech. He called the West out for, numerous crimes against humanity. He called the West out for what it is, a subservient culture that revolves around an American hegemon who only cares about America and nobody else. When the United States does something, the United States only does it for the benefit of America. The United States is a friend to no one. The United States is a partner with no one. The United States only knows how to use and abuse. And I'm sure we're going to be getting to the questions. Nord Stream 2 pipeline is proof positive. The United States committed an act of international terrorism and an act of war against Germany and Europe. Statement of fact. And the Nord Stream 2 incident will also be one of those historical pivot moments that people are going to study years from now. What was it that caused Europe to pivot away from the United States? Nord Stream 2. Mark my words. Nord Stream 2 is the incident, because, Joe Biden just came straight out and lied. It shouldn't surprise people that the President of the United States lies, especially about something that's supposed to be covert in nature. Why did we expect John Brennan, former director of the CIA, remember Mike Pompeo? We lie, we cheat, we steal. Well, that's what they do for a living. And he's not going to tell the truth. The truth is what everybody knows. Joe Biden confessed to the crime. He said, this is what I intend to do. And he did it. But Putin today, not only did he increase Russia's population by 8 million, not only did he increase the size of Russia by, I don't know the exact figure, but it's a larger, he decreased Ukraine. And this is the tragedy of the Ukrainian nation. This didn't need to happen. What happened today is solely the fault of NATO, the United States, and the Zelensky government. They opted to go down this path, a path that has the only light at the end of this tunnel is the light of total Russian victory now. Ukraine has lost 20% of its territory permanently. It will never get it back, ever. Never. And they're probably going to lose an additional 20 to 30% of their territory if this conflict continues. Russia has given Ukraine a chance to negotiate for peace, but the terms are going to be harsh. Terms are demilitarization. That means this entire NATO army that has been built up has to be dismantled, eliminated. It means that denazification. It means that the Zelensky government has to go away. Regime change. I had an interview with a Russian politician the other night, and he said something interesting. He said that the Russian troops, once they start moving, aren't going to stop till they get to the Polish border. That means all of Ukraine's being occupied. And this politician has the ear of Putin. He's very close to Putin. He's in Putin's party. Former general Andrei Gurulov, I think his name is. I'm horrible with names, so forgive me. But
yeah, I saw that that was yesterday. You interviewed him.
Correct.
Just so people know and they can find it, is that a particular day of the week, or you just set based on availability?
Well, it's supposed to be on Tuesdays, but because of the referenda, we went ahead and pushed it off so that we'd have something to talk about.
Okay.
But the point is, today is a historical day for Russia. Today, Russia grew. Today, Russia reclaimed lands that have historically been Russia, even though they belong to Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the irony is that Vladimir Putin was one of the biggest defenders of Ukrainian sovereignty. In 2014, following the CIA-backed coup d'etat against Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, and then the mobilization of these neo-Nazis, Stepan Bandera worshiping thugs who proceeded to murder, rape, pillage, torture Russian citizens, civilian ethnic Russians. They banned Russian language, they banned Russian culture, they declared war on Russia. And these people rose up and said, enough. We don't want to be part of this new Ukrainian nationalism. We want out, and they declared independence. They had a referenda, they voted for independence, and they appealed to Russia in 2014. Please take us in. And Putin said, no, we will intervene to defend your rights. We will intervene to get you autonomy, but you are part of Ukraine, and we have to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And for 8 years, Putin actually defended Ukrainian territorial sovereignty more than the Ukrainian government did. But it's over now. The special military operation is entering its 8th month now. And Russia has just grown. Ukraine has shrunk. This war will not end until Ukraine is destroyed as a nation. It's something I predicted back in December of last year. I said, if this goes to war, a couple things are going to happen. One, Ukraine will disappear as a modern nation state. Two, the sanctions will backfire and Europe will collapse. The economy of Europe will absolutely collapse. And three, the political unity that exists in Europe, both in terms of the EU and NATO, will also fracture permanently. It will be the end of NATO and the EU. Said that all in December. It's all happening right now as we speak. And now we can go back to the issue of Nord Stream 2. It will be the historical pivot that will cause Europe to break away from the United States once and for all.
All right. Well, the events are happening rapidly, and the problem is it's hard to get to everything. That article that you wrote about the CIA is definitely worth addressing, but I think people really want to talk about the Nord Stream situation. So let's get to the questions, and we'll start with Parviz Narmak from Stockholm. How do you think Russia will react to the pipeline explosions, and is the U.S. government determined to beat Russia even at the cost of a nuclear war?
Well, let's answer the second part of that question first. We have the answer, and the answer is no. Today, after Russia made the announcement that it's absorbing these 4 former Ukrainian territories into Russia, Ukrainian President Zelensky held a very bizarre ceremony where he went out to a table surrounded by 2, beefy-looking thugs, and he basically said he's signing a document requesting or demanding accelerated entry into NATO. That basically responding to the Russian actions, he wants to now be part of NATO so that Ukraine will be protected by Article 5 protection, etc. And, for weeks, NATO members have been speaking big. I mean, Jan Stoltenberg thumping his chest. Russia is, I'm not allowed to use accents anymore. So Russia's,
Who imposed that ban? Who
my
banned?
conscience. My
Oh,
conscience is imposed. But no, basically saying that NATO will defend Ukraine, that Russia is evil, da 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 da. As soon as Zelensky did that, Stoltenberg got on TV and started stuttering. Oh no. NATO, Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. Never, never, never. And then Joe Biden, Mr. Tough Biden, I've been warning Russia and all this kind of stuff. Nope, Ukraine will never be the West just dumped Ukraine into the toilet bowl of history. Yes, they'll continue to put money in there because their goal has never been to save Ukraine or defend Ukraine. It's been to sacrifice all Ukrainians for the goal of bleeding Russia, of hurting Russia. It's not working. There's a big battle being fought right now on the Eastern Front, the city of Lyman. Russian troops have been holding out heroically. The Ukrainians have pumped in everything. They've stripped all their reserves from everywhere in a desperate bid to capture the city on the day that Russia was absorbing these territories. But it didn't work. Not only did the troops hold out, but the Russians finally brought their reserves in. And these reserves are counterattacking. They're slaughtering the Ukrainians. Ukrainians have poured everything in. And I think this time tomorrow, we're probably going to see the beginning of the Russian counteroffensive that will not only destroy the Ukrainian army, but you're going to see them maybe recapture all of Kharkov, capture significant territory. Who knows where it's going to stop? And this is NATO's fault. This is NATO's fault for pumping up the Ukrainians, making them think they had an army, and then abandoning them, because Ukraine has been abandoned right now. You're totally abandoned, Ukraine. You might as well surrender now, because if you continue this fight, you're going to lose 4 more territories. You're going to lose Odessa, Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkov. They're going to become part of Russia too. That's a 100% guaranteed statement of fact if you don't accept Russia's terms right now. But Ukraine won't, because NATO won't let them. Even though NATO just said you'll never be a part of us, Ukraine is addicted to the NATO money, to the NATO weaponry. So that's where we stand. So no, we know right now that the West isn't going to go to nuclear war over Ukraine. Not at all. Joe Biden has said he will defend Article 5. Every square inch of NATO territory is sacred, and all. And I believe, but Russia's not threatening NATO. Russia has no intention of moving on NATO. Russia is simply going to take its troops up to the Polish border, stare NATO in the face, and that's it. War's over. Now we come to the first part of the question, which was.
Want me to bring it back up?
Bring it back up, because I've been told. Oh, there we go. How do I think Russia will react? Okay, what we need to understand is that Russia is the world's foremost producer of energy. People I know are going to be screaming, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia. No, Saudi Arabia is America's foremost producer of energy. What I mean by that is back in 1945, President Roosevelt met with King Saud, and in the Gulf of Aqaba, I believe, on a USS warship, and they cut a deal that the United States would guarantee the protection of Saudi Arabia. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would allow its oil fields, oil resources to be developed in a manner which best met America's national security and energy security requirements. So Aramco, the Arab American oil company, was formed, and Aramco basically overproduced the Saudi oil fields. So what I mean by that is they built more infrastructure than the market needed. And the reason why they built more infrastructure is that based upon global energy security issues, the United States may have to call them up and say, hey, Saudi Arabia, I need you to pump up the oil production. Now, you can't do that if you didn't have sufficient infrastructure in place. But Saudi Arabia has reserve infrastructure in place. So Saudi Arabia says, yes, sir, hits the button, oil is produced. And then when the market requires less oil, we call them up and say, hey, Saudi, lower the oil production. They go, got you, boss. They lower it, and then that other stuff goes back into reserve. That's the role that Saudi Arabia played for the United States. They're not doing it for the world. They're doing it for us. Russia, on the other hand, is a global energy presence. They sell energy to everybody, even the United States. Wait a minute, Scott, isn't the United States one of the foremost energy producers in the world? Aren't we self-sufficient? To a degree. But I have to remind Americans that we have a whole bunch of oil refineries on the Gulf Coast that have been built, billions of dollars, specifically to handle a specific kind of crude that comes from Venezuela. But geez, we've sanctioned Venezuela. We no longer buy oil from Venezuela. How do we get gasoline if we're not, refining Venezuelan crude? Russia has a grade of crude that comes from the Ural Mountains. And we've been buying that 300, 400,000 barrels a day. How could we buy it, Scott? I mean, haven't we said we're not buying Russian oil? Yeah, but we lie. Understand that. When American politicians' lips move, they're lying. We continue to buy this oil from Russia. Now, we don't do it directly. It comes through India. It comes through third parties. That's just the reality of it. But we're buying it because if we don't buy it, we don't produce gasoline. Not all oil becomes gasoline. People need to understand that too. Oil is used for a whole bunch of different things. Different grades of oil get used for different things. Bunker oil for heating. Oil's used in industry to make plastics. Oil's used, to pave your roads. It takes a specific grade of oil with a specific refining setup to make gasoline, to make diesel. And to make gasoline, we need Russian oil. And if we cut ourselves off from Russian oil and Venezuela is not willing to turn the spigots back on, we don't get gasoline. Then what? We have to shut our refineries down to reconfigure them. How long can America go without gas? We can't. You saw what happens when the price goes up. People get a little irritated. So Biden's a liar. But the point I'm trying to make is that Russia knows energy security better than anybody in the world. So why in God's name would we sanction them targeting their energy? If you're going to call a nation a gas station disguised as a nation, that's the derogatory term that people like John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and other geniuses who occupy the Senate of the United States, Joe Biden, Michael McFaul, the former ambassador, really smart people. They've labeled Russia that. But if you're going to call Russia that, you shouldn't be calling Russia that if you're the equivalent of a gas guzzling car that desperately needs fuel. And that's the only gas station in town. Because if you want to shut off business, shut down the gas station, you're going to find yourself on the highway with no gas. Engine not working. Got to walk down. Well, wake up. That's what just happened to Europe. America basically told the Europeans to slit their own throats. Sanction Russian energy, sanction Russia. And then America said, we have your back. Well, we don't have their back. What we have is their wallet. We have their wallet, you see. We don't want them to buy cheap Russian gas. Ask yourself as a European, how did we get to be so prosperous? How did it happen that we can work 4-day work weeks, have month-long vacations, have great health care, have free college education? How did this happen? Cheap Russian gas, that's it. That's the only reason why. If you had to pay market value for the energy that you consumed, you wouldn't have billions, trillions of euros available to live the easy life. The easy life's over, guys. Free ride's done. Thank America. We said, stop buying Russian gas. So they did. And what's America doing? Oh, yeah, you can have our liquid natural gas. Now, we need you to build billions of dollars of infrastructure for us, and we're going to charge you 3 to 4 times the rate you're paying for the Russians. So, yeah, basically going to go bankrupt, but America's going to do good. Joe Biden's getting a big thumbs up from the American gas producers. They're like, hey, thanks, Joe. Thanks for the good business. But the Europeans are paying for it, and they're paying for it in god-awful ways. Their industries are shutting down. People are unemployed. They can't afford it. Price has gone up 2, 3, 4, 5 more times the normal value. Salaries are collapsing. Inflation's rampant, all because of what the United States has done. But even then, we're not satisfied with this. You see, Nord Stream 2, we've wanted to shut it down for some time. Multiple American administrations have said Nord Stream 2 is bad. Why? Because they say Europe is overly dependent upon Russian gas. Well, let me state something very clear. Russia has never used its energy as a weapon. Never used its energy as a weapon. Why? Because the day Russia starts using energy as a weapon is the day people stop buying Russian energy. Because who wants to invest into an energy source only to have somebody then start playing games? Hey, if you don't do X, we shut down. That's how America operates. That's not how Russia operates. Russia is, we have a contract, we provide you, you pay us, it's business. Let's do it. Russia's never used energy as a weapon. But the United States needed to wean Europe off of Russian gas so that we could get Europe to buy American gas. That's purely what's going on. It's pure business. So we bullied the Germans even after $12 billion was invested. The pipeline was put in, even though we sanctioned the pipeline. We bullied the Germans. Angela Merkel, by the way, didn't bend. She said, no, this is in Germany's best interest. But the new guy, Scholz, he bent, and he wouldn't allow Nord Stream 2 to start up. So they basically closed it off. But the Russians pressured it up anyways. They filled the whole pipeline with gas. It was sitting there saying, hey, when you're cold, we got the gas right here. Hey, when you need your jobs back, we got the gas right here. All you have to do is turn the switch on. And you know who was listening? The German people. What did they do last week? The German people went to the streets protesting. And it's not even cold yet. It's not even cold yet. And they're saying, we're not happy with this nonsense. Our industries are closing. Steel mills shutting down because the big furnaces they need, you know what makes the furnaces get glowing hot to melt the steel? Gas. Lots of gas. They don't have it anymore. They can't afford it. Even if America was able to supply the liquid natural gas necessary, they can't afford it. They literally can't afford it. They have to buy all that gas, pump it up. The steel costs too much. Nobody can use it. Aluminum shut down. All the German industries are shutting down. They don't even make toilet paper anymore. So all those germophobic Germans, see what I did there? Don't have toilet paper. Now people say they have bidets, whatever. But it is what it is. So the German people got fed up. They're in the streets. They're demanding that the German government turn on Nord Stream 2. Now, we know the German government, but their foreign minister infamously got up and said, I don't care what the German people say. I will support Ukraine till the dying day. She forgets that she doesn't work for Ukraine. She works for the German people. So even if she doesn't care what the German people think, German people care what the German people think. And they were starting to voice their opinions. That panicked the United States, literally panicked the United States, because the one thing that will undo all of this is when Europe wakes up to the reality that what the United States has been proposing is bad for Europe, and the United States doesn't have a plan B. So we blew up the pipeline. Boom. Now, what will Russia do in retaliation? Because that's the question. But in order to answer that question, I had to give you all of this build-up here. Russia produces energy. Russia, their economy is dependent upon the infrastructure that is associated with producing energy and delivering energy to the market. The last thing Russia will ever get involved in, I believe, is a tit-for-tat destruction of energy infrastructure. Russia, again, the same interview I had with that gentleman, Andrei Gurulov. Sorry, dude, I can't speak. But first of all, I have a lot of respect for the guy because he had the courtesy to go on the show, and B, he gave some very interesting answers, some very eye-opening answers. And one of the eye-opening answers was, you could, he said, you could take out Norwegian gas like that. He said, all this liquid natural gas infrastructure, if you sink 2 tankers, no tanker will ever sell because nobody will insure it. He said, things can happen. Russia can make things happen covertly. You'll never know. We'll never admit it. We'll never talk about it. But the problem is, and I agree with him, Biden's an idiot. Biden did something because he could get away with it for the moment. Sooner or later, the world's going to know. But he didn't understand that the golden rule, do unto others as you're going to have done to you. The United States is extraordinarily vulnerable to this. It doesn't take anything to drop an LNG tanker at all. The LNG infrastructure, the receiving areas, doesn't take anything to take those out. And so if you want to get into a tit-for-tat exchange on, energy infrastructure, the United States and Europe are as vulnerable, even more vulnerable than Russia is. So they opened the door for Russian retaliation. Russia's not going to retaliate.
Well, speaking of vulnerable, I'm curious about how vulnerable the pipeline is. I mean, I'm just an idiot layman, and so I see miles and miles of pipe underwater, and I wonder, is what happened? Should this be a surprise? In the future, what can we expect? How difficult is it to protect the pipeline?
Well, pipeline is first of all, the solid steel pipe, about 2 to 3 centimeters thick, weighs an awful lot. but then they encase it in several inches of concrete. The pipe is designed to withstand, let's say a United States aircraft carrier decides to park itself over a pipeline. And they say, anchor down. I don't know if that's the term, I'm not in the Navy. They drop the anchor. And the anchor goes in the water and comes screaming down to the bottom of the ocean and wham, hits the pipeline. Pipeline is designed to withstand that. It's designed to withstand that. It can take a direct hit from an anchor dropped by an aircraft carrier. So it's also designed to withstand earthquakes. It's designed to withstand nearby volcanic eruptions. It's designed to withstand a whole bunch of things. But it's not designed to withstand a warhead designed to pierce armor. And that's what the United States used on it. I think right now there's a good reason to believe that what was used was actually a torpedo, remotely guided torpedo dropped by a P-8, maritime reconnaissance aircraft that was flying over the pipeline on September 26th. And they dropped several of these into the water, and then they were guided down, and they blew up the pipeline. That's what the United States does. But now,
well, does Russia? I mean, you're giving your interpretation based on what's obvious, from a distance. But with all the military surveillance equipment that Russia has, do they know that, like literally know? And do they have the capability of?
Well, what I'm giving you is from what's called open source intelligence.
Yeah.
Meaning that airplanes don't fly unless people track them. Each airplane has a not a responder, I'm losing the term. It basically a device that broadcasts its location, and that'll have a specific code to it. And it's attached to it, and that code is attached to a cell number and all that. So people track the airplane. It's not a secret. I'm not giving away any national secrets here. We know that the American aircraft flew over it. We know the U.S. fleet was over the target. We know that the Navy was working on that target multiple times since July. We know that the Russian Navy was far, far away. And if the open source intelligence people know this, transponder. Thank you, Paul. You're a superstar. It's called transponder. I was calling it a responder. I'm like, no, that's not right. But transponder. But the fact is, the Russian intelligence service has just come out and said, we know who did it. We have the evidence. We have the proof. We know who did it. Now, they could be lying, but this is a game of high stakes here. And the Russians, they're going to play their cards when they play their cards. The Russians aren't like the United States. They don't play the media game. The Russians are very bad at information warfare. They're not good at winning over the public with propaganda. They are very good at the facts. And the Russians have the facts. Putin is a man. I'll tell you this about Vladimir Putin. He's a man that, you won't often find him saying something that turns out to be a deliberate lie. The one time they got him was about the little green men in Crimea, when he said, I don't know anything about little green men. And then he said, it's probably locals that came up. And later on he said, no, those were Russian soldiers. So, clearly Putin is capable of telling a lie when it serves the interest. And some people say, well, therefore he's telling a lie today. It's not in Russia's interest to blow up this pipeline. The exact opposite. If Russia wanted to stop the gas, they hit the off button. That's it. Why blow up $12 billion worth of infrastructure? Why start the precedent of destroying energy-related infrastructure? Remember, Russia is one of the largest producers of energy and one of the largest distributors of energy. So there it is. The actual device is the Automated Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, ADSB. I'm learning something tonight. Thank you, people. I like this.
We have a smart audience.
We do have a smart audience. I show confusion and they come up with the right answer. This is good. Teamwork. But
crowdsourcing intelligence. Well, Scott, but the question
Russia's not going to do anything. Russia's going to repair the pipeline. Russia's going to reestablish its role as a reliable provider of energy, because at some point in time, this conflict will end. At some point in this time, Europe's going to pivot away from the United States. Europe's not going to want to have that U.S. liquid natural gas anymore. I'm just telling you right now, they're losing the appetite. Right? They can't afford it. The infrastructure is too much, and it's coming at a huge price. The United States declared war on Europe. The United States declared war on Europe. We blew up critical European energy security infrastructure for our sole benefit. We have condemned Germany, the most advanced economy in Europe, to third-tier status. When Germany comes out the other end of this winter, it isn't going to be the same Germany, and they can't rebuild. It's not like they can say, okay, turn on the gas, we'll get our industry back up. There can't be any gas because we blew up the damn pipeline. And the Germans know this now. They know it. It's going to take years for Germany to recover if they ever can. And when they recover, it isn't going to be with overpriced American liquid natural gas. It's going to be with cheap Russian gas coming from Nord Stream 2, because the Russians, instead of retaliating, are simply going to rebuild the pipeline, put themselves back into business, and say, we're the reliable provider of energy.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm asking you, Scott. So it'll be repaired. And this time, Russia obviously didn't stop it. So that's what I'm asking you. In the future, is Russia going to be able to adjust to the circumstances and prevent it in the future? How vulnerable are they going to be moving forward?
First of all, this is European infrastructure. It's not Russian infrastructure. It's Russian gas. Russia just lost literally $100 billion worth of gas. They had a whole pipeline full of gas. Oh, Europe. Joe Biden, I'm Mr. Paris Accord. First priority, I can't do accent. First priority when we come into office is we're going to sign the Paris Accord. Greenhouse gas emissions, got to bring them down, got to do all this good stuff. Dude just blew up a pipeline that's blowing methane into the atmosphere. This is a ecological disaster. The Swedes and the Danes and the Germans, anybody in the Baltics have to understand the amount of sea life that's being slaughtered because of this, the pollution that's undergoing. They're pumping the equivalent of, I forget what it was, 5 million automobiles worth of emissions per day into the air from this. So Joe Biden isn't just a lying sack of manure. He's an international terrorist. He's ecological terrorist. He's a man who has destroyed all the sacrifices the Dutch farmers had made. If I'm a Dutch farmer right now, I literally go and I just say, we're done with America forever. Because, the Dutch farmers have had to make every sacrifice in the world so that Netherlands could meet its greenhouse gas emission limits and all this kind of stuff. It just got blown away. Everything Europe's been doing for the last decade, blown away because Joe Biden blew up your pipeline. I mean, it's ridiculous.
All right, so Russia is a stakeholder, and the European countries that benefit from the gas are also stakeholders. Can they all prevent it in the future? That's my question.
Well, I mean, what do you mean? How do you prevent it?
I don't know. I'm just trying to get a sense of
a pipeline. Look, this is the thing. Energy infrastructure is the soft underbelly of every society. That's why the Saudi Arabians and the Iranians and the Israelis and all that stuff aren't going to war right now. And this is why Trump didn't, remember when the Iranians shot down the American drone? And Trump's, I got to bomb them. And his generals went, no, you don't. Because the second we bomb Iran, Iran destroys all of the energy infrastructure in the Middle East, and the Middle East no longer produces energy because you can't protect it. So the idea is, since everybody needs energy, we all respect the fact that we don't blow up energy projects, except unless you're the United States. Then you don't give a damn about anybody because we're poisoning our own selves by fracking, oil and getting fracking. Everybody calls this, natural gas. It's not. It's fracked gas. You get it by breaking open the soil, poisoning water wells, whatever you want to say. But we're doing that. We can supply our own, but now we're saying we want to supply the world. But so we're the ones that have basically violated, a golden rule. Those who need energy do not destroy the energy infrastructure of those who need energy, because they can come back and destroy yours. There's nothing you can do to protect a pipeline. There is nothing you can do to protect a pipeline. It's too damn long. Anybody can knock it off at any time if they want to. It's just that nobody's stupid enough to do it, because the moment you go down that route, look what it did. You literally, by hitting that pipeline, you have condemned Germany and Europe. You murdered people. People are going to die this winter because of this. Hey, Joe, you're a murderer too. Don't tell me about looking at Putin in his eyes and calling him a murderer. You're a murderer, and I'm looking in your eyes right now. I mean, come on. Why aren't people outraged by this? I think people are, but Americans should be outraged at it because Joe Biden literally turned us into the worst nation in the world. Ecological terrorists, energy security terrorists, liars, and we call ourselves allies. Who would want to be our ally? No one should ever be our ally anymore. Nobody should be our friend anymore. We're the worst friends in the world. We blow up the energy that you need to survive, and we don't care about you.
Okay, I get the picture. That's depressing.
Yeah, it's horribly depressing.
Let's move on to the next question. Anna from Moscow. In recent days, several Western countries, including the United States, have urged their citizens to urgently leave the territory of Russia. Does this mean that NATO is preparing to intervene directly in the conflict?
Well, again, part two of that question I've already answered. NATO's already running away from this. They don't want to have anything to do with this conflict. They will continue to provide materiel, but they're running out of that. Germany doesn't have anything left to give the Ukrainians. No one does. French don't. We don't. Canada doesn't. But we'll give them money. But the reason why they're urging people to leave the territory of Russia is because of the mobilization. If you're a dual citizen, they're saying, oh, you could be caught up in this mobilization. But this isn't about reality. I mean, the Russians aren't going to mobilize a dual citizen. This is about playing into the narrative that Russians have rejected mobilization, that Russians are fleeing the country to avoid being drafted and all this kind of stuff. And yes, I think the numbers are real. I think there are 250,000 Russians have fled. Men of military age have fled since the partial mobilization was announced. But let's put that in perspective for a second. Russia's a nation of 150 million. Now, we keep calling Russia an autocracy, a dictatorship, et cetera. It's not. It's a functioning democracy. And in Russia, Putin wins elections 60%, 70%. Dictators don't win elections by 60 or 70%. They win elections by 99.99%. I know. I've worked in a dictatorship called Iraq, and Saddam Hussein won every election by 99.99%. I think one year he decided to be a little bit more democratic and then went to 99.98%. But still, it's a very high percentage. This means that of 150 million people, let's say Putin wins the election by 60%. 40% of the people don't like him, didn't vote for him, voted for somebody else. And of that 40%, there's a significant percentage, I'll call it 20%, that really don't like Vladimir Putin. They still don't. There are people in Russia right now that despise the man. They hate him. They hate him for what he's doing in Russia. They hate him for the fact that he's breaking relations with the West. These are people who are very closely aligned to the West. They don't like Vladimir Putin. And this population has pretty much overreacts to everything that Putin does. And they've overreacted to this mobilization. Panic. And as a result, men are leaving. Let me tell you about those 250,000 men that left. Hardly any of them were subject to this recall. We'll get to that in a second. They weren't being drafted. These are guys who never served in the military. And if you never served in the military, you don't have to worry about anything. These are guys who had medical deferments. These are guys, whatever. They're fleeing for one of two reasons. One, they legitimately don't like Putin. They don't want to fight in his war. Two, they're doing it for political statement. It's a political statement. They're feeding the narrative that Russians are against Putin. They can't demonstrate in the streets, so they flee to create the narrative that Russia is, that Russia is falling apart, that people are fleeing, that this war is unpopular, et cetera, et cetera. The only problem with that is the 300,000 guys that did get mobilized, they all showed up. They went there and they said, here we are. Can't say we're thrilled about it, but we're here to do our duty. And you know what else happened? Around 200,000 guys who didn't get called up went and said, why didn't I get a draft notice? Why aren't I being mobilized? I was in the military. I want to serve. They're the volunteers. So in addition to the 300,000 guys that are being mobilized through partial mobilization, there's another 200,000 guys out there that are also being processed. That's 500,000 people. That's a lot of dudes. Russia right now is going through a period of hyper-patriotism. Man, entire neighborhoods, villages, towns are coming out to send their men to war. Mothers are sending their sons. Wives are sending their husbands. I mean, this is stunning what's happening. And they're not, I mean, they're singing patriotic songs and all that stuff, but these are people who are serious. This isn't the cheap USA crap that we get here in America. These are people who know damn well what's going on. Their grandfathers fought in the Second World War. They know what it's like to lose 27 million people in a conflict, and they know what they're fighting for. They know who they're fighting against. And they're sending their loved ones off to defend the motherland. They're saying, go, do your duty, come home. Russia's being transformed by this. So anybody who thinks that, you know, all these people running away and all that stuff, it's a sign of Russian weakness, you don't know Russia. You don't know what's going on in Russia right now. There's a rebirth of patriotism. Did I answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
Brian Egger from Wales asks, with regard to the pipelines, nobody makes any mention of Britain and their possible involvement. They certainly have the means and maybe a cause. British intelligence has previously been involved in such acts.
You know, the British are nefarious players. You're right. The British have a history of doing this. But this was an act of war against Europe. I know Britain has done Brexit and they don't want to be part of the European Union and all that kind of stuff. This is the kind of move that would be terminal for England if they got involved. Plus, they couldn't do it without the permission of the United States anyways. No, this is an American act. I don't see any British ships there unless the British, I mean, maybe they did. Maybe we trained up a British team, put them on an American ship and let them do the dirty deed. Maybe it was a British torpedo dropped from an American ship, put a British finger on the button. Who knows? But I'm not denigrating the British capabilities. I'm just saying that this was the act of a fully grown adult, not a little poodle.
Well, could it be said that in a sense, Britain, US, and Germany are essentially all the same and it doesn't really make any difference who actually did it? They're acting in concert?
No, Britain's not going to, I mean, Germany, if Germany did it, then they committed suicide. Mm-hmm. So they're not the same. See, America's not committing suicide, but I mean, they are long term, but in the short term, America's like, oh, we get to sell liquid natural gas to Europe, LNG, buy it. 3, 4, 5 times the going rate, but that's okay. We make money, you go bankrupt, but all's good. No, Germany didn't do this because that's Germany literally blowing their own head off. You know, I talked about European roulette. Did I use that line last week? Russian roulette's 1 bullet in a pistol. You know, spin it, click. European roulette, 6 bullets in a pistol. Spin it. Every time you pull the trigger, you get to blow your brain out. That's what the Europeans have been doing. European roulette. Germany didn't do this because that's Germany attacking itself. England, you know, let's put it this way. England's falling apart as we speak right now. Literally, in the next hour, the British pound could literally collapse to nothing. The British economy is tanking. They're done. They're finished. It's over. The IMF has never chastised a developed nation before. The IMF is criticizing everything the British are doing. Liz Truss is basically just flailing. She has no clue how to reverse course. And one of the main reasons is energy. So England, why would the British do it? The only person that has an interest in this is the United States. So England, Germany, United States are not the same when it comes to this pipeline.
Okay, next question. Jonas Lehman from Schinkel, Germany. Could the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines give NATO the justification to go into Western Ukraine with the purpose of safeguarding the last pipeline?
No, there's nothing in NATO charter would authorize that. I mean, you could say under Article 4 that NATO could say that there's a collective security requirement to safeguard the last pipeline, but safeguard from whom? Safeguard from whom? The Russians aren't blowing up pipelines. The Russians aren't blowing up that last pipeline. You know who's shutting down that last pipeline? The Ukrainian. So, no, it's absurd. Plus, again, is NATO willing to sacrifice itself to safeguard that last pipeline? Because that's what you'd be doing. Second you move into Western Ukraine, you're going to go to war with Russia, and Russia is going to crush you, and then you'll be compelled to use nuclear weapons to stop the Russians, and then Russia will take out every city in Europe, and it's all over. That's why NATO rapidly, rapidly backpedaled today. I've never seen such reverse in my life. It literally was, we don't want to let Ukraine into NATO. We don't want to have anything to do with this conflict. You know, when the Russians announced that they were going to annex these territories, hold referendum, Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, came out and said some very aggressive things. So did Ursula van whatever. You know, they were just being tough people. But they're not tough people, because tough people don't just have to talk. They have to walk the walk. In NATO, the Secretary General controls nothing. He's a bureaucrat who basically manages a bureaucracy. People that control things are the military committee. And the military committee, as soon as Russia said this and they heard Stoltenberg, went, no, hey, the adults are over here. We're the military committee. We make all the military decisions. We don't want to go to war with Russia and Ukraine. That's it. Final decisions made. We're not going to war with Russia over Ukraine. And that's just the fact. So, no, this isn't some grand ploy to get NATO involved in Ukraine. NATO is rapidly leaving Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has been abandoned. Think of it for a second. In 2008, NATO extended invitations at the Bucharest summit to Georgia and Ukraine and said, join us. We're NATO. We'll take care of you. Life will be good. Join NATO. That's my seductive voice. I won't use it ever again. So the Georgians bought into this nonsense. And what happened to Georgia? Boy, they made a move thinking people were going to back them up. Short little 5-day war in August, got crushed. The end result, not only did you suffer a humiliating defeat, lose hundreds of your own people, but the Russians went ahead and recognized the independence of Abkhazia and Ossetia. So you lost a whole bunch of territory. For what? Because NATO said, join us, we'll be there, but NATO was never there. And NATO has been encouraging Georgia to set up a second front in this conflict, getting the Georgian nationalists spun up. Let's support our Ukrainian brothers. Thank God the Georgian government was mature enough not to fall into that trap. I think right now they're looking at it going, we dodged a bullet on that one, because Russia will take the rest of Georgia. I mean, that's just a statement of fact. Georgia doesn't stand a chance. Why? One, they're a small country. Two, NATO will never defend you. NATO is the worst alliance in the world. They'll never have your back. NATO abandoned Georgia, just like NATO's abandoning Ukraine right now. It's tragic. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have lost their lives under the flawed belief that NATO is going to be there, have their back. NATO just abandoned you, Ukraine. How foolish do you feel right now?
Okay, we have a voicemail question from Chris in Texas.
Hey, Scott. My name is Chris. I'm from Texas. I was just wondering what Russian EMP capabilities are. I've heard some people speculate that it's more of just like a Hollywood thing. But I was reading a little bit into it. A lot of it went over my head, but it seemed like they have non-nuclear EMP and traditional nuclear style EMP. I was wondering if they might use either of those against command centers, not just in Ukraine, but maybe at NATO bases. And if they use nuclear options, it's, as I understand it, it's within their doctrine that it would not count as nuclear use as long as it's a nuclear EMP. Do you think that's a viable threat? That's about all. Thanks.
No, it's a good question. EMP, electromagnetic pulse, basically. Look, let's put it this way. In the Cold War, one of the tactics that both sides used was the notion of firing a nuclear weapon that would do an air burst in a general area, and the EMP would shut down all the electricity. If you see the movie The Day After, 1982, I think they show that people are driving in their cars as the Soviet missiles come in, then they impact over the American missile base, and you see the explosion, and then the cars, everything shuts down because the EMP came in and just fries all the circuits and everything. So I know that was a Cold War tactic. To use that today, it would be an air burst nuclear device, and that, I mean, you can say what you want about the doctrine. That counts as a nuclear attack. So I don't think you get to dodge that. So I do think if there was a general nuclear exchange that they might employ that. But both sides have tried to harden their military electronics against electromagnetic pulse, and so because it can be done not only with nuclear, but it can be done in a conventional way. There's EMP generators out there, and he's on to something here. Again, I would imagine that the Soviet or Russian special forces have these devices. They may be pre-deployed in areas, or they may be brought in by special operators that can go close to command and control centers. You set off this EMP device, and you basically fry electronics, disrupt communications. Both sides have that. We use it. They use it in counter drone. Some of the counter drone technology is EMP generators that fry the drone electronics to get the drone to drift off and die. So everybody's using it. And I'll say this: the United States is far more vulnerable to this kind of disruption of its communications than the Russians are, for two reasons. One, it's very expensive. When I was in the military out in Sandia National Labs, where we were doing the stuff for the INF treaty, we had a facility called the Technical On-Site Inspection Facility, posted, and we'd go there and test all our equipment before we sent it off to the Soviet Union. But right next to us was this giant array of antennas, and inside they had this wooden device, and you'd put equipment on there, and basically that was the big thing where you tested all the electronic jamming, you tested EMP, you tested everything for that. So it costs a lot of money when you're going to build a device or build a weapon system, an aircraft, let's say, and you have to harden it against EMP. You have to test it. It's very, very, very expensive. And so when we started the global war on terrorism, we started taking shortcuts because we didn't need to protect stuff against EMP. We're fighting goat herders and wedding parties and villagers. And so we stopped doing that. And a lot of the intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance infrastructure that we have right now is not hardened, is very vulnerable. And, the other thing is the United States needs perfect connectivity to work. It's the equivalent of, Jeff, what you and I are doing right now. This show is wonderful. We have great software, StreamYard, yay. We have people calling in. We have questions. It's all flowing nice. But if my daughter goes up right now and flips off the router, this show is over. It's done that quick. The way the American military works right now is everything requires a tremendous amount of bandwidth to flow data back and forth. In Afghanistan, we actually had to we had to have airplanes fly over the valleys so that we could relay communication down to the special forces teams and other units down there to have this kind of connectivity. What happened to Americans when we lost that connectivity? The Taliban kicked our butt. I just don't mean to be too blunt about it, but every time you read a story, about American troops, what saves the day? Airplanes flying in, dropping bombs on people without any anti-aircraft capabilities. Without those airplanes, the Taliban were going to beat us one-on-one. They were beating us all the time one-on-one. We need perfect connectivity. We need perfect intelligence. We need perfect comms, perfect air support. We need perfect everything. And if you introduce EMP into that or other forms of communications disruption, the U.S. military ceases to function. And that's one of our great Achilles heels. These units that we have right now in Poland, we think they're actually going to be able to operate the way they train, because they don't train for electronic warfare, not the way it really is. Because if you do that, then the units just sit there and go, we don't know what to do. We can't communicate. We got no instructions. What do? You die. Who trains very well for this kind of environment? The Russians. No, it's a good question and exposes a real vulnerability in the American style of warfare, indeed NATO style of warfare. And look at the Ukrainians right now, this NATO army that we've built for them. What makes it work? Connectivity, because we have a team right now. We know it. They've admitted it. We have a team in Germany. We have another team in Poland that is gathering intelligence and then communicating in real time to a Ukrainian who has one of these iPad type devices, who gets the intelligence, gets the target, puts it in his howitzer and fires it. The howitzer is a GPS howitzer, requires input from the United States to get the precision target. You take away that connectivity, and the Ukrainians just sitting there on the battlefield not knowing what to do. Can't do anything. So the Ukrainian military is also vulnerable to this. And the reason why I bring that up is I think starting in a couple of days, the Russians, when they take the gloves off, are going to exploit that vulnerability. All this connectivity that NATO's been enjoying free of charge with the Ukrainian military goes away.
Okay. And big thank you to everybody in the Ritter household for not sabotaging the podcast, including Maverick.
Careful, you might generate a response.
William Cairns from Edinburgh. That's Scotland, I'm pretty sure. How many more weapons can the USA and their NATO allies supply to Ukraine? The cost to Ukraine must be enormous. What do you think will happen to Russia if it lost this justifiable war?
Well, Russia just made this war an existential war, so they're not going to lose it. What I mean by that is Russia is going to commit whatever resources necessary to finish the job. Is NATO willing to commit whatever resources are necessary to prevent Russia? The answer is no. We already know that because NATO says we're not getting involved. That means all they could do is continue to supply more weapons. To give you an example of how many more weapons can the USA provide, Congress just passed a $12 billion supplemental budget for the Ukrainian military that includes provision of 18 of these HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. But they're not being delivered now. They're not being delivered next year. They won't be delivered till 2024. Why? We don't have any more to give. We already gave them all the extra ones we had. We have no more extra. In order to give them more HIMARS, we'd have to take them away from frontline combat units for the United States, and we're not willing to do that. So we have to build them new, brand new. It takes time to build them. The defense industry doesn't just spit them out. You have to order them up. You have to get parts built by various vendors all around the country. You have to come in. And unless you're willing to pay more for overtime and increase staff, increase production space, you're only going to get them through the very narrow production window that's existed in the past. We didn't have to worry about building large numbers quickly because we would procure them over time. Ukraine needs them now. They're not going to get them for at least another year and a half. That's the same thing with Germany. Germany has no more weapons to give Ukraine. Germany can talk all they want about giving them weapons, giving them money. There are no more weapons to give. Canada, nothing. Netherlands, nothing. The Brits, they got nothing. They've given it all away. If they give anything more away, it comes from their active duty forces. And at this time when NATO's panicking about the potential of Russia, continuing the offensive once it takes over Ukraine into NATO, is NATO really going to strip itself naked to help Ukraine? Ukrainians have lost the war. That's just straight up. The Ukrainian army was defeated sometime in June and July when the last of their Soviet-era equipment that they started this conflict with was destroyed by the Russians. Since then, they've continued to fight only because NATO has poured in tens of billions of dollars of equipment to reconstitute this military. And the person's right. Germany voted. It went to the parliament. The parliament voted. I think it was 100 and something to 400 and something. Overwhelming amount of German parliamentarians said no more weapons to Ukraine. And that's going to happen now. Now, for a couple of reasons. One, Ukraine has showed itself to be incapable of victory. Wait a minute, Scott, didn't they just take Kharkov? Wait and see how long they hold Kharkov. I think the Russians are going to own it in a couple of days. Or not days, maybe weeks. But, no, Ukraine has squandered what NATO gave it. They threw it away in politically motivated offenses that's cost the Ukrainians tens of thousands of lives, and all of the equipment that NATO just gave to them, most of it's gone and destroyed. So, there's nothing left to give. So, the notion that Russia's going to lose this war is laughable. Russia's already won the war. Now it's just a question of how long it's going to take them to either completely occupy Ukraine or convince the government of Ukraine to agree to unconditional terms of surrender.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Yuri from Menlo Park. Oh, sure. You deserve a little acknowledgement. Yuri from Menlo Park, California. How much does new and advanced technology determine who wins wars? such as, for example, the current war in Ukraine? Is it true that Russian technology is too primitive?
Well, let's look at it this way. The M777 howitzer, America's top front of the line, lightweight, 155 millimeter howitzer, has a round known as the Excalibur round. It's a GPS guided round, and everybody's talking about, ooh, we gave the Ukrainians the GPS round. And sure enough, we see videotapes of the Ukrainians putting the round together and doing all the stuff that needs to happen, and they fire it, and downrange is a drone, and sure enough, there's a bunch of Russians in a command post, and boom, they get them. Yay, Ukraine! Good job. Well, the Russians have something called the Krasnodar. Same thing, same technology, and they've been using it against the Ukrainians. The notion that Russia is somehow old and primitive is just absurd. The Russian tanks are some of the most modern in the world. I think we had a discussion last time, I won't go through it again, but about the armor that's on the Russian tanks, and the reactive armor and the nature of the way it works, sensors, radars, and all this stuff, things we don't have on our tanks. To call the Russians old and primitive is an absurdity. The one thing that you should note, though, is that the Russian equipment functions in all weather conditions. Unlike our equipment. Our equipment doesn't function in all weather conditions. The Russian equipment is designed to get dirty, muddy, and still operate. There's an old saying, the M16 rifle, great rifle, very accurate rifle. Even a guy like me shoots high expert every time. Not because I'm a great shot, because it's a great rifle. It's easy to shoot. But you take the M16 and you throw it into a mud, a pool of mud, and you pull it out and try and fire it, it don't fire. You can hit the forward assist, you can do whatever you want. It ain't going to work. You have to disassemble it and clean it. Take the AK-47, throw it in the mud, pick it up, shake it off. It's going to fire every time. Is it old and primitive? No. It's just sturdy and rugged and made for real world war. And most of the Russian equipment's like that. It's not as sexy as the Western equipment. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles and lights. It just works. It works every time you need it to work. But the Russians have very advanced technology. They're doing things that we can't. Let me put it this way. Hey, NATO, fire your hypersonic missile today. Oh, you don't have one. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to ask. Russia, fire yours. The Kinzhal. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but it's the dagger. They'll fire that. They fired it several times. They'll fire it more times. They've got weaponry we can't even imagine about. So the notion that the Russians are somehow old and primitive, no. Technology means a lot, but you know what else means a lot? Men with cojones. Men who are willing to stand their ground. Men who are willing to pay the ultimate price, who aren't afraid to put their lives on the line. Men like the men who are defending Le Mans today. Those are Russians who are in there doing the job. As the Russians would say, Robote, working, we're working. Who else has cojones? Ukrainians. There's nothing more difficult than launching a frontal assault against a well-defended position. And Ukrainians are doing it over and over and over again, high casualties, and they're doing it. There ain't any technology in the world that's going to compensate for that. You can have all the technology in the world you want, but if you have a wimp, you have a coward, if you have somebody who isn't up to the task, the technology just gets thrown aside as they run away. At the end of the day, you're going to need somebody with the intestinal fortitude to stand up and say, I'm willing to give my life for this cause, and then go forward and do it. And both Ukraine and Russia are blessed with men that are willing to do that. And this is the biggest tragedy of all, because somebody who's willing to lay their life down for their country is the greatest resource the country has. And they're just being wasted right now. This is a war that didn't need to be fought. And some of the best and brightest of both countries, Ukraine and Russia, are being slaughtered, wasted on this battlefield today. And shame on NATO and shame on the United States for pushing this war on Ukraine.
All right. You don't seem overly concerned with pronouns with all this talk about cojones, but okay. Roman from Montreal, Canada.
Wait. Back up for a minute. What?
What? I don't know. I was just thinking about how in the U.S. Yeah. That's what I was told.
Okay, I didn't understand where you're going with that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a pronoun person. I'm a real man, real woman person.
Right. I think perhaps the Russian military is also on the same side of that.
I think they're pretty much. I think all of Russia's on that side.
Yeah.
There's a funny movie.
All right.
There's a funny movie just to bring it up. Song of Fire and Ice or something. No, that's Eurovision with Will Ferrell. And there's a wonderful scene. They had this great this guy playing a Russian singer, but at one point in time he's homosexual, he's gay, and someone says, brings it up, and he's like, "Oh no, he him." Just hilarious scene. Again, I just used an accent. I'm not allowed to do it, so forgive me.
All right. How is I haven't been on Telegram lately. Are they still debating whether or not I'm actually funny?
No, actually, everybody seems to be in love with you. The tide's turning against me, however. They decided that you're the best guy, I'm the worst guy, and I have to step up my game. I was actually told I have to call you a pencil neck who I'm going to hold over a toilet. But I will never do that, Jeff, because I respect you.
Okay, great. 1,000 miles apart from each other, so that's a factor. Yeah.
Plus, you're the only
My
one who
heart,
survived
I know.
an actual
My
knife
heart,
fight.
I know I'm funny.
You are funny.
Thank you. All right, Roman from Montreal, Canada, who might or might not be funny, we don't know, asked the following. Do you think it's possible for NATO and allies to sanction Italy given the new elected leader's position and affinity towards Russian gas? Or would sanctioning the third biggest economy cannibalize their efforts to cripple Russia?
Well, first of all, their efforts to cripple Russia have failed egregiously. You mean their efforts to cripple themselves, because that's what they've done. They've shot themselves in the feet. NATO can't sanction anybody. Understand that. NATO is a military alliance with some political aspect, but the sanction is done by the European Union, by the constituent states, by the G7, the people who control the economy. But do I think it's possible for the EU and the G7 to sanction Italy? They've already threatened that. You've seen Ursula, German last name, say that we will use the same tools that we used against Hungary and Poland against Italy, if they go down this path. And you say the new elected leader's position affinity towards Russian gas. Actually, she doesn't have that. She's actually been pretty hardcore anti-Russian. She's been very supportive of Ukraine. In fact, right after she became clear she was winning the election, she sent a tweet to Zelensky and said that, we're here to help you defend freedom and all that kind of stuff. Now, the coalition that she's put together includes, two political parties who have historically been sympathetic to Russia, including former Prime Minister Berlusconi, who was pretty much an open ally of Putin. And so, as any governing coalition knows, compromises will have to be made. Whether or not she's going to totally compromise, I don't think so. I think she's going to try and maintain common cause with NATO. She said that we don't want to be the weak chink in the NATO army when it comes to Russia. But here's the problem. She also has said that she is, this is Giorgione Meloni. Giorgia Meloni. Yeah, I'm sorry. To all of Italy.
Maloney is the part I know. The first name is a little more tricky.
But Miss Maloney, she's come straight out and said that the European Union's trash, the Euro's trash. And she told Europe when she was elected, she said no more free. The day of the free ride's over. No more free ride. Meaning Italy's not just going to bend over and do whatever the European Union wants. Unlike the previous prime minister, Mario Draghi, I think his name was, who former head of former banker, and he basically, let's give him credit. He helped get Italy out of the pandemic slump that it was in, his policies, but in doing so, he totally capitulated to Europe. He basically turned Italy into nothing more than a the slave of the European Union, the slave of European banks. And Meloni has said, no, we're done with that, finished. Whether she's going to divorce herself from the EU or not, we'll see. But her number one priority is to the Italian people, and the Italian people are going to need energy, and that energy is going to come from Russia. So whether she likes it or not, at the end of the day, for her to stay in power, she is going to have to make some serious compromises about where she's going to get energy, how that's going to work. She's also not going to play the game of propping up the rest of Europe. She's going to put Italy first. And I think that this could actually be the beginning of the end of the European Union and of the euro. Italy is the third largest economy. The three currencies that keep the euro viable are German, French, and Italy. And if she drops out, they're in a world of hurt. And Germany's gone, finished, it's done. So it's France. France is the only viable currency left, and they're not getting a free ride on this energy business either. It's going to be a tough winter for the French. But I do think that Italy's days as a member of the European Union are pretty much finished. She's not a fan of subordinating Italian sovereignty to a European, unitary form of government. She's a big fan of Italy working for Italy, and I think that's the end of the European Union.
Right. Well,
yeah.
do you see her maybe her not insignificant charisma and oratorical skills to maybe delivering a speech to the Italians describing how they would suffer and kind of let the people decide? Would that be a wise political strategy?
I think she's doing that. I mean, every time she opens her mouth, she's known for her rhetoric. This is a woman who speaks flamboyantly every time she talks. I just watched her give a TV interview, and I mean, she was on fire. I mean, I like this lady. I can't say I'm a big fan of the resurrection of a female Mussolini, but she's not that. She the problem with Europe is that it's caused all these sovereign nations to get rid of sovereignty. They don't stand for anything. What is Italy if not Italy? And she is basically rising up and saying the Italians have to be have to take pride in who they are. They have to stand for Italy. So, no, I like this lady. I think she's great. And frankly speaking, because I'm somebody who believes that the United States needs to get the hell out of Europe, and I think that the European Union is little more than a vehicle for American control of Europe, I'm all in favor of Europe breaking back down into its constituent parts. I like the idea of going to Italy and spending lira, and then having to go across the border to France and transforming that lira into francs. That was the old way of the way Europe worked, and it worked A-OK. This European Union thing has destroyed Europe because what does Europe stand for? It stands for nothing. I mean, look at Germany. It's a pathetic little, wimpy little nation of people who forgot what Germans are. And I'm not talking about Germans who put on armbands to give the Sieg Heil and march. I'm talking about Germans who are hardworking, believe in, an industrious way of life. Instead we have a Germany that's turned into compliant sheep, especially if Germans won't stand up and pull out the United States for blowing up their pipeline. But no, I think Maloney is the wave of the future. I think we've spoken in the past about revolutionary change that's going to overtake Europe this winter. Maloney is the leading element of this revolution. I think the revolution is going to hit Germany really, really hard.
All right, the next question is from Marco in Belgrade. Is there a possibility that foreign troops, meaning NATO, will withdraw from Kosovo?
Yes, and that'll happen when NATO collapses. But that's a possibility. We keep talking about NATO going to war with Russia. We keep saying they're going to have a war with Russia in Ukraine. There's pretty much zero possibility of that happening. You know what there's a possibility of? Greece and Turkey going to war in the Aegean Sea. They're both NATO members, but they go to war against each other. If that happened, France said they're going to join the side of Greece. That's 3 NATO countries at war with one another. Germany and Poland are making warlike noises. Poland demanding $1 trillion in reparations. The Germans saying, if you want to scrape off that scab, then we'll take Silesia back. So there's more likelihood of the Germans fighting the Poles than there is of NATO fighting Russia. NATO's falling apart as we speak. And as Europe collapses, as the European Union collapses, so too does NATO. So, and when that happens, you'll see the nations that have contributed troops to the I think it's called KFOR, the Kosovo occupation force. They'll be withdrawn, and there won't be anything left.
Okay. Was the pretext for the creation of Kosovo completely murdered by the U.S.?
Yeah, the CIA basically took these Albanian criminal groups, called them the Kosovo Liberation Army, then went in and encouraged these people to attack Serbian villages, knowing that the Serbians would retaliate. But the Serbians retaliated not by slaughtering civilians, but by killing the KLA. There was a village, the name I can't remember, but it got a lot of attention, where the media went in and there was bodies all over the place. They're going, look at the Serbs. They came in and they slaughtered. This is genocide. But anybody who looked at the photographs goes, those are all military-age men wearing boots, wearing fatigues. There wasn't a civilian amongst them. They were all the KLA who died because they launched an attack against a Serbian village. We called it genocide. NATO used genocide as an excuse to invoke collective self-defense. There was no genocide. There wasn't even a significant loss of life. And most of the people who died were KLA fighters who were carrying out attacks against Serbian villages. It was a total fabricated case made by NATO, 100%.
John C. from Little Rock, Arkansas. That's in the United States of America, in case you don't know. He asks, what is the I assume his pronoun is a he. He asks, what is the status of the numerous biolabs in Ukraine?
I assume he's referring to the American-funded biolabs managed by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. What is the status? Either occupied by Russia or in a panic being shut down and having all evidence eliminated of their existence. The Russians have the goods on the United States. And I say this with great embarrassment because, it's funny because now people are starting to come out and say some pretty interesting things, such as, all we were doing is biological research, but there's a very fine line between biological research and offensive biological capability. So maybe people could misinterpret what we were doing as offensive biological weapons. No, the Russians don't misinterpret anything. It's stated right there in writing what you were doing. You were researching specific pathogens that were genetically modified to impact Russians only, and you were researching how to put them on drones and deliver them in a manner that replicated migratory birds. So what do you call that? Is that biological research, or is that an offensive biological weapon? The Russians have the goods on the United States. That's just the fact. The problem is nobody's listening because it's coming from Russia. But if the United States was the nation that it claims to be, then Congress would immediately convene a hearing to find out why the United States was in violation of the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, and why were we doing what we were doing in Ukraine, using U.S. taxpayer money that was appropriated by Congress to ostensibly help Ukraine comply with the Biological Weapons and Toxin Convention. We were doing the exact opposite. That's what an honorable nation would do, but Congress isn't going to do that because I think Congress was in on the game. Everybody knew what we were doing. Everybody. Now the Russians do too. They got the documents.
Well, as you were saying this, I'm saying, man, this is so important, so valuable, and I sure hope they don't censor us on YouTube because we have our largest audience ever, coming up to almost the 7,000 mark watching live. Usually a lot more watch when it's recorded. So I'd like to call people's attention to a Substack post we published this week where we have links to all our other socials. So if you people would, rather than wait until it happens, hopefully it won't happen, but there is the possibility YouTube and others plug on all this. So don't wait for that. Please follow us on all the other social media channels before it happens so that in case we get censored, you'll know how to find us. They're not going to be able to censor us everywhere. So go to Story, if you can just, yeah, that's it. But the Substack is the one that has the links to everywhere. There you go. Okay. Thomas, who's from somewhere. He didn't want to reveal it. What are the chances of the usual suspects, crazies in the basement, setting up a nuclear explosion somewhere in Ukraine and blaming Russia for using WMDs, thus creating a casus belli and opening the gate for escalation? You kind of addressed that before. By the way, we got tons of questions, and they all were along these lines. You know, false flag was a phrase that kept coming up over and over again. That's what's on people's minds, Scott. People think there may be some sort of a false flag.
The problem with that false flag is it would basically, the United States doesn't want to get involved in Ukraine because it could lead to nuclear exchange. So, and we know that a nuclear exchange would result in the termination of all human life on Earth as we know it. So if we know that, then why do we go in and do a false flag that triggers the very thing we're trying to avoid? I don't see people doing that. And the other thing is, every nuclear weapon has a unique signature. What I mean by that is, you just don't blow up a nuclear device and go, "Oh, somebody did it." And I'll give you an example. Look at the IAEA inspections in Iran. They went in back in the early 2000s, and they did some swipes on this equipment, ductwork and everything that had been provided to Iran from Pakistan. And they found, I think, they found man-made uranium isotopes enriched to 36%. That's a weird number, 36%. It's not low enriched uranium, 3 to 5%. It's not high enriched uranium, 80, 90%. It's not even the 20% that the Iranians would use in their Tehran medical research reactor, 36%. And then they did more research, and what they found is that even though the equipment came from Pakistan, it had originally come from the former Soviet Union, where it was involved in the production of enriched uranium for Soviet nuclear reactors, which use 36%. And then they also were able to break down the exact isotope and identify the source of the uranium. The bottom line is uranium has a signature. How it's produced has a signature, et cetera. So for this to be a false flag and blame it on the Russians, you would actually have to have a Russian device that used Russian uranium, that was sourced from Russian uranium mines, that was processed in a Russian factory, so that you had all the signatures together. Because if you just went and took a device and using non-Russian uranium and you made it look like a Russian device in terms of its functionality, it would take it very rapidly. Everybody would know that it was a false flag. So then it's no longer a false flag. So no, I don't think that that's a viable thing. I understand that's a concern, but I don't think it's viable because there's too many people that are smarter than me that know how to do forensic investigations, and they would quickly figure this one out.
Tiger. I'm going to need to see a birth certificate to know if that's a real name. From the Syrian Arab Republic. What do you think about the movement of part of the elite forces of the Syrian Arab Army to Russia to help in the battle against Nazism?
The fact he calls him Tiger implies that he's from the Tiger Force, which is an elite force in the Syrian Arab Army to Russia. Yeah, no, Syrian Arab Army. Had you asked me that question early on in the special military operation, I would have said it's absurdity. The Russians don't, need and don't use foreign fighters there, but Putin has signed a law that allows foreign volunteers to come in and be incorporated into the Russian military. So, if that's the case, then I think it's a case of Syria repaying Russia. In September of 2015, Russia dispatched to Syria a military expeditionary force that literally saved the Syrian Arab Republic, saved the government of Bashar al-Assad. The Syrians were on the ropes. The U.S.-backed Islamic insurgents were making progress, and there was a good chance that the Syrian government was going to fall, and the black flag of Islamic radicalism would have been raised over Damascus. But because of the Russian intervention, they were able to stabilize the situation and eventually turn it around. And today, the Syrian government is firmly in control of the vast majority of the country. It's the Islamic terrorists who are on the ropes, and Syria owes that to Russia. So the notion that there are some Syrians, especially from the Tiger Force, which knows the Russians very well, who would feel inclined to come to Russia's assistance in Russia's time of need would not surprise me at all. And because Vladimir Putin has signed into law the procedures under which foreign nationals can volunteer to serve with Russia, it appears that there's a mechanism to make that happen. I don't know how and what numbers. Syria is still very much a nation at war, so I can't imagine the Syrian government saying, let's take our most elite combat experienced fighters and send them all to Russia while we're in the middle of getting ready for a conflict against Turkey and the Kurds in the north. But I do see it's possible that I don't like to use the word token because that undermines it, but a smaller presence would be sent, as a gesture of goodwill.
All right, a writer very carefully choosing his words. The difference between the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug.
Did you come up with that?
No. I think that was Mark Twain. Not me. Anyway, that's what I thought of as you were searching for. Just appreciate that, writer. So why isn't the question showing? Let me try it again here at the stream. There it is.
Hello.
Paul West from Potter Valley, California. How long will it take to fix the damaged pipeline? Is there any way to determine from debris who committed the sabotage? I think you kind of addressed
Second
that
part
already.
of that question first is 100%. I'll tell you right now that if you put me down there in a submersible and gave me the opportunity to photograph and survey the scene, I would pick up the fragments of the weapon used. I would get samples of the high explosive used. Again, every high explosive has a unique signature. And I will tell you exactly what weapon was used, who made the weapon, where it was made, etc. I would look at the damage done. It would tell me what size the weapon was, a very specific warhead to penetrate. We'd have to take a look at the totality of the structural damage to determine these things. But forensically, 100% certainty. And this is what has to have the United States worried, because the Russians have some very good underwater submersibles. Some are manned, some are unmanned. And I can guarantee you that the Russians have all the photographs and have taken the debris that I'm talking to you. There's no way in hell that Russia didn't do that already. That's why when the head of the Russian intelligence service says, we know who did it, we have the evidence, I believe him. Because if I'm smart enough to know that how to do this, how to approach a forensic investigation on this, I can guarantee you the Russians have people who are even smarter than me that know how to do it, and they have the motive to go in and find out. And they can do it covertly, and they can do it rapidly, and I believe it's already been done. So yeah, the Russians will do that. How long will it take to repair it? A Russian official has come out and talked about this already. He said that they expect shortly to begin the process of repairing. It's going to take months, maybe even a year. There's two methods that can be used. One is to go down at a depth, or whatever the depth is of the explosion. Some people were talking about 100 meters, and build a structure over the damaged pipeline. And then that structure would become an environmental work zone where people would come in and actually repair the pipeline in place. Maybe replace cut it, bring it in, weld the steel pipes, and then re-encase it in concrete. And then they have to do the various tests and stuff like that, bring down radiographic equipment to do x-rays of the welds, and then they would have to pressurize it and make sure that it can withstand the pressure. things of that nature. The other way to do it is to raise the pipe. And you'd have to bring in these big ships, the same ships that laid the pipe would be used to raise it. And you'd need these cranes that are, rated to 30 tons or something like that, maybe even more than that. The problem is that right now sanctions prohibit those ships from operating. One would think that in the case of repairing the pipeline, sanctions would be waived, but we're in the sanction crazy period of time and history. So it'll probably, unless sanctions are waived, these ships won't be able to come because no operator wants to risk having themselves to be being sanctioned for this work. But if the sanctions were raised, then the pipes are actually designed to be lifted out of the water for repair work just of this nature. The pipe is designed as enough flexibility in the pipe to do that. That's how they laid the pipe. So it would just be a reverse lay. And they'd bring the pipe up and again do the work on the ship to repair the pipe. But this is the guy, the Russian official said this could take weeks, months, even a year. But they're going to fix the pipe. They're going to begin the process of repairing the pipe very soon. I think the first thing that has to happen is the pipe has to be emptied of gas. You have to create a safe work. You don't want to go down there and start doing welding with gas still in the pipe. So they gotta flush the pipe. But
Okay, Paolo from Edmonton, Alberta. That's our neighbors to the north, the fine nation of Canada. His question, or her question, is if Russia decides to attack the infrastructure of North America, is an attack on Canada and Alaska a real possibility? Canada has 1,000 armed, 30,000 in reserve.
Well, the short answer is yes. If Russia wanted to do this, then both the United States, especially in Alaska and Canada, are very vulnerable. That's why you don't want to get into the business of starting to take out critical energy infrastructure. That's why the United States is literally the dumbest nation on the planet for initiating this process. Because if the Russians weren't the patient, mature nation that they are, with a leadership that's capable of thinking beyond instant gratification, then this is the kind of stuff they would do. They would carry out the tit for tat. Whether it be a direct action by special forces infiltrating through the north, or whether it be remote using a drone, underwater drone, airborne drone, whatever. The CIA was able to blow up Soviet gas infrastructure simply by infiltrating in modified gas pumps that the Russians or the Soviets were using. And these gas pumps were designed to send a false signal to the main control station, saying that the pressure was normal. Meanwhile, the reality is the sensor was making the pressure go up and up and up and up and up until there was an explosion. And the CIA bragged that it was the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded. It was picked up on satellite. So there's different ways to attack infrastructure, and the Russians, knowing energy better than any other nation in the world, would definitely be able to exploit these vulnerabilities. There's no amount of troops. Look, Turkey right now is in a panic because with the attack on Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1, the United States has also been very critical of the Turk Stream pipeline that brings Russian gas through the Black Sea into Turkey and then feeds it up into southern Europe. And so Turkey has done a couple of things. One, the guy was talking about British. They've pretty much taken control of every British passport holder in Turkey. They're under constant control of the Turkish authorities right now because nobody trusts the British anymore. They view everybody as a potential James Bond. Two, they have mobilized their forces and reallocated forces, and they have put around 30,000 troops dedicated to pipeline security. They are actively patrolling the pipeline to make sure that nobody attacks this pipeline. They've allocated naval forces. They've allocated ground forces. They're paranoid about somebody trying to attack the Turk Stream pipeline the way that Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And what does that tell you? It tells you that it is critical infrastructure that's vital to the national security of Turkey, just like Nord Stream 1 was vital to the national security of Germany. The Turks, at least, are a proud nation that insists on defending its own sovereignty, unlike the Germans, who are a nation of sheep who are allowing the United States just to lead them to the slaughterhouse. But no, this is why Russia, Russia isn't going to do this, but they could. If Russia wanted to attack critical infrastructure, not just in Alaska and Canada, they could hit Norway. They could hit the new pipeline that opened up the same day that the United States blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2. The Norwegians opened up a pipeline that goes through Denmark, through the Baltic into Poland. And Poland was bragging about how they are now free of Russian gas. That pipeline could be shut down that quick by the Russians if they were so inclined.
You know what that means, Scott? It means we just broke the 7,000 mark. That's how many people are watching live on YouTube.
Wow.
Must be because one of us is a hunk.
You.
Oleg.
And you're funny too.
Oleg from Germany. It looks like the West is going to make a provocation with a nuclear weapon in the Ukraine, accusing Russia for that. Why the intention of NATO for that?
I think we answered. I just disagree with that.
Yeah, we did.
Completely. I don't see the West doing that. I explained why I think a false flag nuclear attack isn't going to work.
You did.
And
you did.
And NATO is running away from a fight. They don't want to fight. They can't fight. They have nothing to fight with. You're from Germany, Oleg. Where's your army? I'm just stating a statement of fact. Where is the German army? They're in barracks. Get them out of barracks. You can't because the equipment doesn't work. You did send a reinforced battalion to Lithuania. Bad idea. Study history. It's never a good idea to send German troops to Lithuania. But you did anyways. You sent a battalion up there, but you had to literally cannibalize the totality of your armored force to get that battalion there. Now, Stoltenberg says he wants you to send a brigade. You can't. You don't have a brigade to send. You've been sending all your equipment to Ukraine. You got nothing. So, yeah, Germany, NATO. You guys can't fight Russia right now. So, no, NATO's not looking for a fight because it would be the biggest one-sided fight the world has ever seen since when the Russians beat the Ukrainians.
Mukhariz, or something like that, maybe, from Malaysia asks, in the event EU countries are starved for gas and energy during the coming winter, what are the chances Russia will be attacked for its resources? Is this a possibility?
Zero chance, because if you attack Russia for its resources, you're threatening the national security of Russia, thereby invoking the Russian nuclear doctrine that says, take them out. Nobody's going to attack Russia. Nobody's going to attack Russia.
Okay, that's it for all the questions submitted in advance. While we have 7,000 people watching live, should we take some questions from our live audience?
Let's exploit 7,000 people.
All right, consider them exploited. Thanks to Tori for helping us in the background. Thanks to everybody for watching, and especially thanks to those who are contributing with their tips and super chats and whatever they call that stuff on YouTube. We really appreciate the support. Bella Scott, watching you religiously, thank you so much for your honesty and integrity. I'm curious to hear your opinion on the role of the WEF in all this madness.
So that's the World Economic Forum. That's the Davos crowd, I assume.
Yes, I think so.
If that's what she's talking about, then what is Davos? Davos is the annual self-congratulatory meeting of the world economic elite, primarily Western economic elite. They invite people to come in and speak. They speak to themselves. They talk about how great they are. But it's basically the G7 having a party. That's what it is. It's the world economic elite, the G7, having a party for themselves. And the G7 is to blame for all of this. The G7 is the economic arm of NATO. And so NATO doesn't do anything unless it's done in harmony with the G7, with the European Union. So the World Economic Forum is all about the NATO-driven agenda, the American-driven agenda of using Ukraine as a vehicle for weakening Russia. It's one and the same. Now, let's just say this about the World Economic Forum, though. If they're so smart, why did they all support the sanctioning of Russia now that the sanction of Russia has backfired and every single one of those people that made it to Davos are losing all their money because their economies are collapsing? They're not that good. There's my pro hint for the day. You sit there and look at the Davos people, you look at them in Switzerland, you say, oh my goodness, the lifestyle of the rich and famous, they're pretty stupid because it's because of their policies that Europe's falling apart right now.
All right, Tori, you have another question for us from the 7,000 people we're going to exploit. That's the writer's word there. Does Europe have the backbone to tell the USA off?
Well, which Europe are we talking about? Are we talking about the European political and economic elite who currently control the reins of power? No. Germany's proven they're cowards. The French are cowards. They're all cowards. Maybe Meloni's not a coward. She's a newcomer. We'll see. But when you say Europe, I think we should also talk about the European people, this awakening sense. You know, what got Meloni elected? The Italian people saying we've had it with this whole European Union nonsense. The Italian people saying we want to take care of Italy first. And so once you inject a little bit of pride, a little bit of backbone into a nation, they're capable. What you know, Meloni's telling the European Union straight out, and she is also challenging Macron. She said, while she believes in NATO, she said there needs to be two pillars of NATO. She said we have to recognize that NATO is literally a tool of the United States. So from an Italian perspective, we need to, you know, help prop up the American pillar. That is, we work with the Americans, but we also need a European pillar. We need the Europeans to be able to stand on their own. That's a new way of thinking. Germany may very well go through revolutionary change this winter. The German people are PO'd. They're mad. They're angry. Doubly so since the thing they were asking for just got bombed by the United States. In Germany right now, heads of industry are starting to say that Germany needs to cut off relations with the United States. Heads of industry are saying this. So I do think that's why I said early on that the destruction of Nord Stream 2 will be one of those pivotal moments in history where Europe pivoted away from the United States because the United States had proven itself not to be worthy of the name friend or partner. So I do believe that Europe has the backbone to do this. But it's the European people, not the political and economic elites that currently govern.
Right. Well, you make a good point that not all of Europe is in the exact same situation. And I don't want to take time away from our beloved audience, but real quick, can you just answer the question this way? Which are the countries that are facing pain in the coming months in Europe, and which do you think will be okay?
Well, they're all facing pain, every single one of them. But nations like Hungary, who have done up a separate energy deal with Russia, they're not going to freeze this winter. You have other nations. I think Bulgaria, Croatia, and Slovakia might be, working with Azerbaijan to get gas brought in, but I don't think it's going to come in time. The fact of the matter is, all Europe is going to suffer, but nations like Austria, like Germany, like Italy, that were heavily reliant upon Russian gas, Russian energy, are going to suffer the most.
Okay. Tedros Bitu. Why did Russia stop at Kherson? Why didn't they go for Odessa, a majority Russian-speaking people? And do you think Kharkiv will be included soon?
Well, first of all, the Russians came in with limited resources, 200,000 troops. Now, there was more than that. They had another 60 to 80,000 that were operating in the Donbass region. Those were the militias for the Donetsk and Lugansk and such. Kherson was strategically important because Kherson secures Crimea. Kherson is necessary to secure Crimea. Kherson provides the strategic depth to secure Crimea, which is a strategic resource. You also had to take the Kherson province to secure the water. If you remember, in 2014, when Crimea was annexed or absorbed by Russia, the Ukrainians dammed up the water supply, and Crimea went through a serious water crisis. So one of the first things the Russians did as they moved into Kherson was to blow up the dam and get the water flowing again. So the Russians, secured this, and then from their strategic perspective, it was more important for them to go right through Zaporizhia to secure a land bridge with the Donbass, to take away the access to the Sea of Azov, to take Mariupol, where the headquarters of the Azov regiment were, and to create some sort of line of communication connecting Crimea through Kherson, through Zaporizhia to the Donbass. That was their most important thing to do. So you need to accomplish that first and build your build your foundation of strength for future operations. The next most important thing was the strategic feint against Kiev. The Ukrainians had anywhere from 40 to 80,000 troops concentrated around Kiev, and if you didn't threaten Kiev, those troops could be reallocated to the Eastern Front. So it was very important for the Russians to come down through Belarus, and to come in through Belgorod and threaten Kiev. And in doing so, they made a move on Kharkiv. They tried to seize Kharkiv. Actually, in the first couple of days of the conflict, Russian troops penetrated into Kharkiv, but they were basically killed or captured. But that was it. For Odessa, I think the decision was made to threaten Odessa with amphibious assault. During the early days of the war, everybody's talking about the potential of a Russian amphibious assault against Odessa. And that also froze Ukrainian troops in place, preventing them from reinforcing. So the Russians didn't have sufficient forces to do everything at once. They secured Kherson, they secured the land bridge, they threatened Kiev, they tried to take Kharkov but failed. And that's it. At the end of the day, they were compelled to stop their diversionary movement against Kiev, take those troops out, and reconsolidate to complete the reconquest of Donbass. The Ukrainians had 60,000 troops dug in the most extensive prepared defensive network in modern history, and that became the Russians' number one priority. They simply didn't have the resources to do that and move on to Odessa. When they mobilize these 300,000 troops, and if they get even a percentage of the 200,000 volunteers that are coming in, that this is going to change. I also think the ongoing battle of Limon that's being fought right now is going to be pivotal. I think the Ukrainians are literally burning through their reserves in a desperate attempt to take Limon. They have some sort of political victory at the moment when Russia was absorbing these Ukrainian territories. But the Russians are holding fast. They're starting to counterattack. Because the Ukrainians withdrew too many troops from the vicinity of Kherson and Kharkiv and brought them in, there's no more strategic depth for the Ukrainians. And now what happened to the Russians in Kharkiv when they didn't have strategic depth and the Ukrainians penetrated the lines, the Russian defense collapsed, they had to fall backwards. The same thing is going to happen to the Ukrainians, I believe. I think we're going to see in the weeks ahead that Russia is going to be carrying out some very aggressive offensive operations. Kharkiv will fall. I think we're going to see the Nikolaev province fall. And who knows, if Russia has enough force generated, we might see Odessa fall because the Ukrainians don't have anything left to defend. They've burned through everything.
All right, Tori, you're doing a great job coming up with some good questions. And by the way, Tori and I co-host a separate podcast on Tuesday nights. So if you want to check that out, jeffandtori.com. And some of the Scott Ritter fans have been joining us, and we appreciate that. So that last question, if you want to get that back, I hope I didn't make it hard to find. Thanks, Tori. There's a word here I can't pronounce, but I bet you can, Scott. What is going to happen to the Ukrainian parts of DNR? And what's that next word?
Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast. Okay. Well, the Russians have made it clear that they incorporated all of the territories. So even though parts of Kherson, parts of Zaporizhia, parts of the Donetsk the People's Republic continue to be occupied by Ukrainian forces, the Russians have said that we incorporate the totality of. So they view the Ukrainians that are there now as illegitimate occupiers. They've given the Ukrainians They told him to leave or you'll be dealt with harshly. And if the Ukrainians don't leave, and it doesn't appear they're going to, then they're going to be dealt with harshly. Russia will take over the totality of the territories. And this is the thing. We're no longer talking about Ukrainian territory. It's Russia. It's Mother Russia. You could say, well, no, it's not. The Ukrainians don't agree. It's Mother Russia. Why? The Russians agree. And they're the only vote that counts right now. So the Ukrainian forces may think they're defending Ukrainian territory, but from the Russian perspective, you're on Mother Russia, and the Russians are going to do everything necessary to evict you from Mother Russia. So I give you this 100% certainty that every Ukrainian that chooses to fight on what's left of these territories will die or be captured or wounded on those territories. They're not going to hold them. Russia will take them back because this is Mother Russia. This is a sacred duty. This is a sacred obligation, and Russia that Russia's undertaken.
What does that phrase "Mother Russia" mean, as opposed to just simply saying Russia?
Well, it's the motherland, Mother Russia. It's the Russians have a long history of defending their soil from foreign attackers. It's their motherland, Mother Russia. Mother Russia gave birth to you, nurtured you, raised you, made you what you are. It isn't just a cute little turn of the phrase. It has deep meaning. I mean, Putin used it today in his speech, the motherland. It's not just a throwaway. It's not like Joe Biden throwing out, garbage terms. Joe Biden doesn't believe anything he says. Putin and every Russian understood exactly what he was saying when he spoke about it. Mother Russia.
Yeah, it's very evocative. Nuno Fernandez, what do you think of Yale historian Timothy Snyder?
I know exactly who you're talking about, and I literally just read something that he wrote, and the problem is I just blew a fuse because I literally know who you're talking about, and I just read something he wrote, and I was actually going to write an article about it, but I just blew a fuse. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that one because my brain that said I know who Timothy Snyder is literally just went blank. So I can't talk about the article because I would have to, if I read it right now, I read 3 words in it, I'd go, I got it all. It would just reprogram, but my brain just blew a fuse. So I apologize. We'll do that one next week. I promise.
All right, maybe somebody in our beloved audience will provide you with those 3 words. So, Tori, if that comes in, let's put it up on the screen for Scott to see. Moving on, though, do you think Russia should test NATO's commitment to Article 5 by destroying a weapons depot beyond Ukraine's borders or destroying NATO ISR capabilities?
ISR is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Those are the satellites, the aircraft, and the various drones and such that are collecting intelligence on the Russian military, then feeding it to Ukraine so they can more effectively target their weapon. Legitimate target, one would think. Let me put it this way. Russia's going to win this war no matter what. The one way Russia could lose this war is to test NATO's commitment to Article 5. Because then that changes the equation altogether. You throw in some variables, potential for nuclear conflict, and suddenly what was a guarantee becomes a total cluster, you know what. There's no reason for Russia to test Article 5. They gain nothing from it. NATO ISR is a pain in the neck. It's a harassment factor, but Russia will defeat it. They are defeating it right now. They're going to win this conflict, and so the last thing they would do is complicate. War is about friction. And the goal of every military commander is to reduce friction so that things run rather smoothly. The last thing you want to do is take a bucket of sand, pour it in there so you're just grinding yourself up. Testing NATO's commitment to Article 5 would be the equivalent of throwing a bucket of sand into your engine. It just doesn't help anything.
All right. We're at the 2-hour mark now, Scott. So as is our custom, I'd like to just check in with you to see if you're running out of steam or if you want to keep going. I'll let you know that we are holding steady at over 7,000 live viewers, but don't let that influence your decision.
No, I'm not, but we need to do the last 3.
All right. It is time for the last 3 questions. And Tori, good ones. Eric Suarez, a regular viewer, I recognize his name, and thanks for your support, Eric. Do you know the requirements in military as a foreigner? Do we need previous experience?
I know that the Russians have published the requirements to join the Russian military as a foreigner. In fact, they actually passed a law today that streamlines Russian citizenship for foreigners who volunteer. I don't have that off the tip because I don't want to join the Russian military as a volunteer, so I didn't pursue that. But if anybody wants to do that, I know that it's easily, if you Google it, you will find it. It's there on the internet. The Russians have published it.
All right, two more questions. Next is from John Lies, or something like that maybe. What is the end game for both sides? How and what are the parameters for normalcy?
Well, I don't know if you're ever going to get to normalcy. Things have gone too far for that for a long time. There's no trust between Russia and the West right now, primarily because the West has violated everything it claims to stand for. It's withdrawn from every treaty, etc. The end game for the United States and NATO is unrealistic. It's the weakening of Russia, the collapse of Russia, the dismemberment of Russia. It just isn't going to happen. It was interesting. Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, has come out and said something very mature. And she said, it's time that we take Russia seriously, that we take Putin's words seriously. They have meaning. And it's time we start looking for a new European security framework that addresses everybody's concerns, including Russia. That's the ultimate end game for Russia. Ukraine is a part and parcel of the overall Russian strategy, which was articulated in December of last year in the draft treaties they provided to NATO and the United States regarding a new European security framework, one that didn't require the dismantlement of NATO, but did require NATO to withdraw its infrastructure back to the 1997 lines, meaning that if you're Romania and you weren't a member in 1997, that NATO ballistic missile defense facility that's been built has to go, has to be removed. Same thing in Poland. But they get to be NATO. They're still protected by Article 5. It just means that NATO is not going to forward deploy NATO specific infrastructure into these nations and threaten Russia. Russia would like to bring back some critical treaties. For instance, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty would be revived. The Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty could be revived. The one where the airplanes fly over Europe and take pictures, Open Skies Treaty could be revived. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty could be revived. All of this is part of a European security framework. All of it used to exist. It's not like Russia's asking for anything new. They want the things that were negotiated in the past with good reason to be reinstalled. And the beauty of something like a Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty that's attached to this, see, a lot of people think that Russia's looking for a unilateral advantage. That's what the United States does. Russia doesn't want a unilateral advantage. Russia wants peace and security. And if you incorporate a Conventional Forces in Europe type treaty structure onto this European security framework that's been put forward by the Russians, what it means is that while NATO may be moving its infrastructure back to 1997 lines, oh, look what Russia would do. They'd move all this infrastructure they've been moving forward. They'd move that back to the Urals, perhaps, or at least a line that's maybe just a little bit east of Moscow, equidistant, so that you create this demilitarized zone, not totally demilitarized, you keep enough troops to protect your borders, etc. A zone that then would be inspected with people like me, but younger and better looking, smarter hopefully, and they'd go back and forth and make sure everybody complies with the treaty. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing, where you didn't have tanks facing off against each other, that you had people living in peace and harmony? You didn't have to worry about nuclear weapons coming down, raining on your cities. That's what Russia wants. There's nothing wrong with what Russia wants. It's one of the best end games out there, but it does require Europe and the United States to end its 30-year fantasy of destroying Russia, because that's been the policy of the United States and Europe since 1992. since the Soviet Union collapsed. And you know who else believes that? Vladimir Putin. Listen to his speech that he gave today. He makes the case, a rock solid case, about the role played by the West in trying to destroy Russia, which is why a new European security framework is not just something that Russia's requesting, it's something that Russia's demanding, and it represents the end game for Russia. And it's a viable end game for Europe, too. In fact, it may be the one that Europe is more than happy to embrace. It's funny, they ignored it in December of 2021. Let's see what they think about it in December of 2023 after they've been destroyed in the winter of 2022.
All right, and we now come to our final question of the podcast. Rubia Pell. BRICS will now include Iran. So what will this mean?
Well, it means that BRICS is now getting one of the world's largest energy producers, a nation with a sophisticated economy, a nation with tremendous high-tech skills. The Russians are using these Iranian drones right now, the Shahed 136s, they call them, the Iranian coups. But they're amazing. This stuff's going in. You can't jam them. Nobody knows how to deal with it. They're blowing the hell out of everything. It's Iranian technology. Good stuff. The Iranians have ballistic missiles that are pinpoint accurate. Who knows that? The Americans do, because after we assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians fired some of their precision-guided missiles, and they hit everything they were aimed at. Precision. And it's not just military technology. The Iranians have great civilian technology. They have a space industry. They're putting satellites into orbit. They're modern. You can't call them ragheads or other slurs that people tend to throw around there about the Middle East. This is a Persian culture that is thousands of years old. They're some of the smartest people out there, and their inclusion into the BRICS format will provide an economic depth that'll be welcomed. In regional, it brings BRICS solidly into the Middle East region. And I'll tell you why it's also a big deal. Who else is desperately trying to join BRICS right now? Saudi Arabia. And there's an old saying that nations that have economic relations with one another tend not to go to war with one another. It'd be one of the greatest peacemaking moves ever to get Saudi Arabia and Iran working together, towards joint economic, cooperation and to their mutual benefit. And the amazing thing about this is that it could have happened a long time ago if the United States wanted it to happen, but that's not how we operate. We don't operate in terms of peace and harmony. We operate by putting the Saudis up against the Iranians, keeping them in conflict with one another. Let's go through what BRICS stands for. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Who's not in there? The United States or any one of these pathetic European countries that serves as nothing more than a colony of the United States. It's Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa that say the best path forward is through peaceful cooperation. They brought Iran in. Other people are going to come. Saudi Arabia wants to become a member. Argentina is already a member. Others are going to join. BRICS is the new reality. People, the G7 tried to dominate the global economy by creating something called the G20, the 20 largest developing countries. You know what BRICS is? It's the G20 minus the G7. Guess who took over the world? Not the G7. The G7 is pathetic. All 7 of their members' economies are collapsing right now. You know whose economies aren't collapsing? The BRICS economy. Because they're not based on destroying people or keeping people down. They're not based on sanctioning people. It's based on finding a way for the mutual benefit of people through economic cooperation.
All right. Well, my favorite weapons inspector, I want to thank you. You had a very busy week. I think it's almost time for you to get some sleep. Thanks also to our wonderful producer, Tori Mansfield, for her behind-the-scenes.
Tori Mansfield. She's a great producer and an introducer.
And also, I want to thank Eric Foya for his research assistance, and that was very valuable. Thanks to our audience. And please follow us on Substack. Let me just see if we can get that on there. You'll never miss a thing. It won't cost you anything to subscribe, so please consider that. And join us Tuesday night for Scenes from the Evolution. That's the podcast I do with Tori on Tuesday nights. And we'll be back next Friday night, unless Marina insists on a date. But as of now, we're going to be on next Friday night with our favorite weapons inspector. So we will see you then. Have a good week, everybody.